The neighborhood looked calm that summer evening. Families were returning home from work, sprinklers ticked across freshly cut lawns, and the faint hum of cicadas echoed under the fading sun. But anyone who lived there knew peace was just an illusion. Beneath the manicured hedges and painted fences, trouble always brewed. Trouble that came with a smile, a clipboard, and the sharp tongue of the neighborhood tyrant, HOA Karen. She had been running the homeowners association for years, strutting around like she owned every brick, blade of grass, and tree root. No car parked crooked, no flower planted without permission, no child's laughter too loud escaped her notice. She thrived on control, feeding off fines and lectures, a self-appointed queen in a kingdom she never built. Most neighbors kept their heads down. They nodded politely, paid their dues, and prayed to avoid her wrath. But that night, during the monthly HOA meeting, Karen found a new target. And this time, her arrogance was about to cost her more than she ever imagined. The community hall was buzzing. Chairs scraped across the linoleum floor as residents shuffled in. At the front sat Karen, framed by the oversized HOA logo behind her, a smug grin already plastered across her face. She tapped her pen against a stack of violation slips like a judge waiting to hand down sentences. That was when the doors opened. In walked a woman no one had seen before. She was tall, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her shoulders broad and posture sharp. She wore a plain long-sleeved shirt despite the summer heat, sleeves rolled neatly to her wrists. There was something about her presence that silenced the room. The kind of silence that came when someone important had entered. Her name was Claire. She had just moved into the neighborhood, buying the house at the far corner lot where the trees cast long shadows at dusk. She moved with calm assurance, setting her bag down and taking a seat in the second row. Some nodded a polite hello. Others looked curious. But Karen? Karen's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. She cleared her throat dramatically, pulling the microphone closer. Well, we have a new neighbor among us, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness that hid daggers underneath. Claire, isn't it? Welcome to the community. I hope you're ready to follow all of our rules. A few chuckles echoed from the back. Karen's loyal followers. The ones who clung to her power because they feared being her next victim. Claire only nodded. I'm here to listen. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that didn't beg for approval. The meeting went on. Talk of lawn regulations. Trash bin placements. Pet restrictions. Each topic delivered like a sermon from Karen, who used the spotlight as if she were running a courtroom instead of a neighborhood association. But then, Karen's eyes flicked back to Claire. She leaned forward, tilting her head with mock concern. Tell me, Claire, she said, her voice carrying across the hall. Why do you keep your arms covered like that? Hiding something? It's almost suspicious, don't you think? Gasps spread across the room. Some shook their heads, embarrassed for her. Others stared, curious at where this was going. Claire's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Karen pressed on. Come now, we're all friends here. Surely you're not ashamed. Unless, her smirk widened. Unless those scars I see creeping from your cuffs tell a different story. The room froze. Claire shifted slightly, her sleeve sliding just enough for the faint outline of scars to show along her wrist. Old, faded, but undeniable. Karen burst out laughing. Loud, unrestrained, the kind of laugh meant not to share humor but to humiliate. Oh my goodness, she sneered. I knew it. What happened? A kitchen accident? Or are you just one of those people who like drama written on their skin? The cruelty stung like poison. A woman in the back whispered, That's too far. Another muttered, Karen? But Karen didn't stop. She stood, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Claire. This community deserves better than secrets. If you can't even take care of yourself, how can we trust you to take care of your home? Scars don't lie. And that was the moment Claire's calm cracked. She stood slowly. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound slicing through the silence. She stepped into the aisle, rolling back her sleeves. First one arm, then the other. The room gasped. Scars ran across her forearms. Long, jagged lines. Evidence of pain, yes, but also survival. Yet what stole everyone's breath wasn't the scars. It was the ink that wrapped around them. Bold, unmistakable. The emblem of a military unit so elite, only a few ever carried it. A trident crossed with lightning, framed by wings. The mark of a soldier who had seen battle most people only read about in classified files. Karen's smirk vanished. Claire's voice cut through the stunned silence, firm and unwavering. These scars aren't shame. They're sacrifice. Every line you see is a moment I fought for people who will never know my name. And this She raised her arm higher, the tattoo catching the light. "This isn't decoration. It's proof. Proof that when this country needed me, I answered. While people like you sat safe in neighborhoods like this, judging others." The hall was dead silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, "I didn't mean." Claire stepped closer, her eyes locked on Karen's. "You laughed at scars you'll never understand. You mocked pain you'll never carry. And you tried to shame me in front of everyone, because power is the only thing you've ever known." She stopped inches from Karen, towering over her. "But you don't know real power. Not the kind that bleeds. Not the kind that fights. Not the kind that survives." Karen backed up, her chair screeching as it tipped over. Her loyal followers suddenly looked anywhere but at her. Claire turned to the room. "I didn't come here to be worshipped. I didn't come here to be feared. I came here to live in peace. But if this association thinks it can break me with gossip, with fines, with laughter," she let the words hang in the air, "they'll find I've survived worse than any of you can imagine." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some whispered in awe. Others simply nodded, respect dawning in their eyes. Karen, pale and speechless, tried to regain her composure. But the power had shifted. For the first time in years, she was no longer the queen of the room. She was the fool who had laughed at a warrior. And in that silence, the neighborhood changed forever. Because from that night on, every time Karen tried to raise her voice, people remembered the tattoo. They remembered the scars. They remembered the look on her face when she realized she had mocked a soldier. And Claire? She didn't need to fight anymore. Her presence alone was enough. The neighborhood had found its new strength. Not in fear. Not in fines. But in the quiet resilience of a woman who carried the weight of battles most would never see. And as for Karen, she never laughed at anyone again. The neighborhood should have been quieter after that unforgettable night. Most people assumed things would settle down, that Karen would retreat into the shadows, embarrassed after being humiliated in front of her own followers. But if anyone really knew Karen, they knew she wasn't the type to give up power so easily. Embarrassment didn't break her, it fueled her. And Claire, whether she wanted it or not, had now become the center of Karen's storm. At first it was subtle. Karen avoided Claire in public, her smile tight whenever she caught sight of her. She pretended not to care, but beneath that plastic grin burned a humiliation she couldn't shake. Her once loyal circle of neighbors had stopped echoing her every word. At the local coffee shop, instead of rushing to her table, people whispered behind her back. Some even dared to laugh when she walked away. And Claire? She lived her life as though nothing had changed. She trimmed her yard in silence, waved politely to passing cars, and carried groceries into her home without asking anyone for help. She wasn't there to fight. But her very presence, the quiet strength in her walk, was enough to unsettle Karen more than 100 shouted insults ever could. Weeks passed. Then came the first strike. One morning, Claire woke to find a bright orange slip taped to her mailbox. A violation notice. The paper accused her of leaving her garbage bins on the street overnight. Claire frowned. She remembered clearly bringing them in before dusk. Shrugging it off, she set the slip aside. A mistake, she thought. Everyone makes them. But then another appeared the next week. And another. And another. By the end of the month, Claire had racked up 5 separate violation notices, each one signed by Karen herself. Parking too close to the curb. Grass too long. Mailbox too dull. Minor, ridiculous charges that had never been enforced before suddenly piled onto her doorstep. Claire calmly attended the next HOA meeting to dispute them. She stood, presented her case, and even showed pictures to prove her innocence. But Karen, sitting at the head of the table with her clipboard, smiled coldly and said, "The board has already voted. Rules are rules." It was clear. The board hadn't voted. Karen had decided. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A few even whispered, "This isn't fair." But nobody spoke loud enough to challenge Karen outright. Fear still lingered in their bones. They'd seen what happened when you crossed her. Claire gathered her papers, nodded once, and walked out without a word. She could have exploded with anger. She could have raised her voice, thrown the evidence in Karen's face, or stormed out. But instead, she walked with the same calm assurance she had shown the very first day. That silence shook Karen more than any outburst would have. Because Karen wanted a fight. She wanted Claire to crack. She wanted her to explode in rage so she could label her as unstable, dangerous, unfit for the community. But Claire didn't give her the satisfaction. So Karen escalated. Late one evening, when most houses were dark, a group of men gathered near the community park. They were the type who always lingered on the edges of Karen's meetings, nodding at her words, laughing at her cruel jokes. She had them wrapped around her finger with promises of influence and inside favors. Under Karen's instructions, they marched to Claire's corner lot. They carried flashlights, clipboards, and cameras. They inspected her lawn, her gutters, even the fence at the back of her property. Every detail was photographed. Every minor imperfection recorded. The next morning, Claire awoke to a stack of fresh violations nailed to her front door. Improper fencing. Unapproved window treatments. Sidewalk cracks. Even the color of her porch light had been deemed unacceptable. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was war. Neighbors began to notice. Some shook their heads in sympathy when Claire passed. Others avoided her altogether, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. But whispers spread like wildfire. Stories of Karen's cruelty had always existed, but now she was openly targeting a veteran. A woman who had served. A woman whose scars told stories too painful for words. And that didn't sit right with everyone. One evening, as Claire watered her front lawn, a young couple approached. They lived 3 houses down, quiet people who usually kept to themselves. The husband cleared his throat awkwardly before speaking. "We just wanted to say, thank you," he said. Claire tilted her head. "For what?" "For your service," the wife added softly. "My brother, he didn't come back from overseas. When Karen laughed that night, it made us sick. But the way you stood up to her, it meant something." Claire's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I didn't stand up for me. I stood up for all of us. Nobody deserves to be mocked for their scars." The couple nodded, their eyes shining with quiet respect. They weren't the only ones. Slowly, neighbors began to stop by. Some dropped off baked goods. Others left handwritten notes of thanks. A few even started sitting with Claire during HOA meetings, offering silent solidarity. And Karen noticed. The more people gravitated toward Claire, the more Karen's control slipped through her fingers. Her once loyal board members now hesitated when she barked orders. Her sharp jokes earned fewer laughs. Her intimidation carried less weight. It drove her mad. So she plotted her most vicious attack yet. Karen filed a motion to have Claire removed from the community altogether. She accused her of being a disruptive influence, of lowering property values with her supposed violations, and even went as far as to question her mental stability. The motion sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. It was one thing to issue fines. It was another to attempt to expel someone from their own home. The night of the vote, the community hall was packed. Every chair filled, residents lined against the walls, murmurs buzzing like angry bees. Karen strutted to the podium, dressed immaculately, her smile sharp as glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we are gathered tonight to protect the integrity of our neighborhood. One individual has repeatedly broken rules, spread division, and created tension where peace once thrived. It is my duty as HOA president to act for the good of us all. Therefore, I motion that Claire be removed from this community." Gasps filled the air. Some residents muttered in disbelief. Others shook their heads. Karen raised a hand for silence. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But rules are rules. If we allow one person to disrespect them, where does it end? Claire may parade her history," her voice dripped with disdain, "but scars and tattoos do not excuse lawlessness. We deserve better." Claire stood slowly. She didn't storm to the podium. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked, each step echoing in the hushed hall. When she reached the front, she turned not to Karen but to the people. "I moved here for peace," she said quietly. "Not for war." But it seems Karen can't tell the difference. She sees rules as weapons and power as something to hoard. She mocks scars because she's never carried any of her own. She rolled back her sleeves once more, revealing the tattoo that had silenced the room weeks before. The trident and lightning gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "These scars aren't shame," she continued. "They're proof of survival. Proof of sacrifice. Proof that when this country needed me, I stood up. I didn't ask what it would cost me. I didn't hide behind rules. I didn't point fingers. I fought. For people who would never know my name." She turned then, finally meeting Karen's glare. "And now you want to throw me out. Not because I broke rules. Not because I harmed anyone. But because I wouldn't bow to you. Because your laughter didn't break me. Because your power doesn't scare me." The hall erupted. Some shouted, "Enough, Karen!" Others clapped. A few even stood. Karen's face turned red, her composure cracking. "She's manipulating you," she shrieked. "You're all fools if you fall for this act." But no one listened. One by one, neighbors stood and declared their support for Claire. the young couple, the elderly man from across the street, even one of Karen's former allies on the board. She deserves to stay, they said. She belongs here. The vote was called. Hands shot into the air. The majority stood with Claire. Karen's motion failed. For the first time in her reign, Karen had lost. But as Claire turned to return to her seat, she caught Karen's eyes. They burned with rage, with humiliation, with the promise of retaliation. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because if there was one thing more dangerous than Karen's power, it was Karen stripped of it. And Claire knew, the real battle had only just begun. The weeks after the failed motion were tense. On the surface, the neighborhood looked normal. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes painted, children playing tag on the sidewalks. But beneath the ordinary, everyone felt the weight of what had happened. Karen had been beaten in front of her people. Not just beaten, humiliated. And a woman like her didn't forgive. Claire knew it too. She kept to her routine, living quietly in her corner lot house. She watered her plants, waved politely, attended HOA meetings without stirring conflict. But she wasn't naive. She had seen too many enemies to mistake silence for surrender. And Karen? Karen was plotting. She spent long nights at her desk, the glow of her lamp casting deep shadows across piles of papers. Violation notices, complaint forms, even property records, her weapons. She dug into Claire's past, filing requests, making calls, searching for anything she could twist into a weapon. And finally, she found it. It wasn't much. Just a line buried in an old news report. A mission gone wrong. An explosion overseas. Casualties. Claire had survived, but others hadn't. The article didn't name blame, but Karen didn't need truth. She needed ammunition. At the next HOA meeting, Karen was ready. The hall was packed again, tension thick in the air. Everyone knew something was coming. Karen stood at the podium, clutching her papers like a sword. Her smile was sharp, predatory. "Neighbors," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we all know Claire likes to wave her tattoo around, reminding us of her so-called heroism. But what she hasn't told you is the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Claire sat in the second row, her face calm, unreadable. Karen raised the paper high. According to official reports, Claire's mission overseas ended in tragedy. Lives were lost under her watch. Innocent soldiers who trusted her. And she wants you to see her as a hero? Tell me, is that the kind of neighbor we want? A failure in uniform pretending to be a savior? The room erupted. Gasps, shouts. Some cried out, "That's low, Karen." Others whispered nervously, unsure what to believe. Karen pressed on, her voice rising. "She hides behind her scars, behind her ink, but the truth is clear. She isn't strength, she's weakness. And weakness doesn't belong here." She slammed the paper on the podium, glaring triumphantly at Claire. And then Claire stood. The hall fell silent as she walked slowly to the front, her boots echoing against the floor. She didn't snatch the paper. She didn't yell. She simply turned to the crowd. "I wasn't going to share this," she said quietly, "because it isn't something I carry for applause. It's something I carry because I have no choice." She rolled back her sleeves, showing the scars once more. "Karen is right. That mission ended in tragedy. We were ambushed. Explosions tore through our convoy. Men and women I trained with, laughed with, fought beside, didn't make it home. And I did." Her voice cracked just slightly. A tremor of raw truth. "I live with that every day. The sound of their voices. The weight of their trust. The pain of knowing I survived when they didn't. These scars? They aren't shame. They're reminders. Every time I look at them, I remember who I fight for. Who I honor. Who I will never forget." She turned then, facing Karen directly. "You think this makes me weak? No, Karen. It makes me stronger than you will ever be. Because you fight for control. I fought for lives. You mock pain. I carry it with dignity. You cling to power. I faced death and I'm still standing." The room was silent. Some wiped tears. Others nodded, eyes hard with respect. Claire stepped closer to Karen, lowering her voice so only the front rows could hear. "You call me a failure? Maybe I am. But at least my failures came from trying to protect others. Yours come from trying to destroy them." Karen's face flushed red. She sputtered, searching for words. "Why, you don't understand." But she was cut off. One of the board members rose. "Enough, Karen." His voice was firm, resolute. "You've gone too far." Another stood. Then another. One by one, neighbors rose from their seats. Some shouted, "We stand with Claire." Others simply crossed their arms, glaring at Karen with years of pent-up resentment finally boiling to the surface. Karen backed up, eyes wide. "You can't do this. I'm the president. I make the rules." But the board member shook his head. "Not anymore. Effective immediately, you're removed from office. The community votes tonight." Hands shot into the air. The majority was overwhelming. Karen's reign was over. She screamed, "You'll regret this. All of you." But her words fell flat. No one listened. No one cared. For the first time, Karen's power was gone. Security escorted her from the hall, her protests echoing down the hallway until they vanished into silence. And then the neighbors turned to Claire. Some clapped. Others wept. A few simply stood in quiet respect. Claire bowed her head. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to live. But sometimes, you can't choose your battles. Sometimes they find you." The crowd erupted in applause. From that night forward, the neighborhood changed. The fines stopped. The fear faded. The HOA transformed from a weapon into a service, run by people who cared more about community than control. As for Claire, she finally found the peace she had sought. Not just in her home but in the respect of her neighbors. They didn't see her scars as shame. They saw them as strength. And Karen? She moved away, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when cruelty meets true strength. Because in the end, laughter fades. Power crumbles. But dignity endures. And Claire, with her scars and her tattoo, proved that true strength isn't in hiding pain, but in carrying it with honor. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more dramatic HOA stories. Your support keeps the channel going, and there's plenty more to come.